I served 40 years as a Navy SEAL, and when I retired at 65, I bought an old ranch to rest. One day, my son-in-law called me. "I'm going to spend 10 days at your ranch with 3 friends. If you tell your daughter, I'll ruin you." I didn't say a word. I just waited for him with a surprise. He couldn't believe what he saw. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Desmond, and at 64 years old, I thought I'd seen everything. 40 years in the Navy SEALs teaches you to read people, to spot threats before they fully materialize, and to never underestimate the enemy. But nothing quite prepared me for the call I received on that Tuesday morning in October. I was sitting on the porch of my ranch in Montana, coffee growing cold in my hands as I watched the sunrise paint the mountains gold. The property wasn't much to look at. 800 acres of rough land with a modest house that needed more work than I cared to admit. But it was mine, bought with every penny of my retirement savings, and it represented something I'd never had during my military career: peace. The phone rang just after 7 in the morning. I almost didn't answer. Sarah, my daughter, usually called in the evenings, and I wasn't expecting anyone else. But something made me pick up. "Desmond!" Robert's voice came through the speaker, and immediately I knew something was wrong. My son-in-law never called me by my first name. It was always Sir or Mr. Patterson, a formality that had persisted through 5 years of marriage to my daughter. "Robert?" I kept my voice neutral, the way I'd learned to do when interrogating suspects. "What's going on?" There was a pause, and I could hear him breathing. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted to something harder, more calculating. "I'm calling to let you know I'll be using your ranch for the next 10 days, starting this Friday." Using my ranch. Not asking to visit, not requesting permission. Using. Is that so? I set my coffee cup down carefully, my training kicking in. Every instinct I'd honed over 4 decades was suddenly alert. "Yeah, that's so." His voice carried a smugness I'd never heard before. "I'm bringing 3 friends, business associates. We need somewhere private to discuss some opportunities." Business associates. Robert worked as a mid-level manager at a telecommunications company in Denver, pulling in maybe $60,000 a year. Sarah had mentioned he'd been talking about investment opportunities lately, but she'd seemed worried about it, rather than excited. "And Sarah knows about this?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. The laugh that came through the phone made my jaw clench. "Sarah's going to be in Chicago that whole week for training. She won't know unless someone tells her." There it was, the threat, delivered with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. "Here's the thing, old man." Robert's voice dropped lower, more menacing. "If you say one word to my wife about this visit, if you so much as hint that I was there, I will make your life hell. I'll turn Sarah against you completely. I'll make sure she never speaks to you again." I closed my eyes, feeling something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't the nervous, eager-to-please young man who'd asked for my blessing before proposing to Sarah 6 years ago. This was someone else entirely. Someone who felt comfortable threatening a man he barely knew. "I know things about you, Desmond," Robert continued, his confidence growing with each word. "Sarah told me about your drinking after Margaret died, about how you disappeared for 2 years and barely contacted her, about how guilty you feel for missing so much of her life because of your precious military career." Each word hit like a physical blow. Yes, I'd struggled after losing my wife. Yes, I'd made mistakes with Sarah when she was younger, choosing duty over family too many times. But hearing those private confessions twisted into weapons made something dangerous stir in my chest. "She also told me about the money you borrowed from her when you bought that piece of crap ranch." Robert's voice was pure venom now. "How you promised to pay her back but haven't managed it yet. What do you think she'd say if she knew her daddy was a deadbeat who can't keep his word?" That last part was a lie. I'd never borrowed money from Sarah for the ranch, but the fact that Robert would invent such a story told me everything I needed to know about his character, or lack thereof. "So here's how this is going to work," he continued. "You're going to disappear for those 10 days. Go fishing, visit some old army buddies, I don't care. Just make sure you're nowhere near that ranch while we're there. And when Sarah asks how her loving husband spent his week, You're going to smile and nod and keep your mouth shut." The line went quiet except for his breathing. He was waiting for me to submit, to roll over like a beaten dog. Instead, I found myself smiling for the first time in the conversation. "You know what, Robert?" I said, my voice perfectly calm. "That sounds fine to me." The surprise in his voice was obvious. It does? "Absolutely. You and your business associates have a wonderful time at my ranch. Don't worry about me at all." Good. I'm glad we understand each other." He was trying to sound confident again, but I could hear the uncertainty creeping in. "And remember, I won't say a word to Sarah," I promised. "You have my word on that." After he hung up, I sat on that porch for a long time, watching the sun climb higher over the mountains. Robert thought he was dealing with some broken-down old man, someone he could intimidate and control. He had no idea that 40 years of military training doesn't just disappear when you retire. He also had no idea that I'd spent the last 3 months installing a comprehensive security system throughout the ranch. Motion sensors, cameras, recording equipment, old habits from a lifetime of needing to know who was approaching my position. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Sarah's number, then stopped. I'd given Robert my word that I wouldn't tell her about his plans, and I wouldn't, but I'd never promised not to show her exactly who she'd married. Standing up from my chair, I walked into the house and headed for the closet where I kept my old gear. It had been 2 years since I'd felt the familiar weight of planning an operation, of preparing for an enemy who didn't know they were walking into a trap. Robert wanted to use my ranch for 10 days with his business associates. I was going to make sure he got exactly what he deserved. The war was coming to Montana, and this old soldier was ready. Friday came faster than I'd expected, and with it, the sound of expensive tires crunching on my gravel driveway. I was in the barn, supposedly checking on some repairs that didn't need checking, when Robert's black BMW pulled up to the house. Through the gap in the barn door, I watched him climb out, stretching like he owned the place. 3 women emerged from the car, and immediately I knew these weren't business associates. They were too young, too polished, too obviously impressed by Robert's apparent wealth. The first woman, a blonde in designer jeans that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill, looked around with the expression of someone visiting a petting zoo. The second, a brunette with enough jewelry to fund a small military operation, was already taking selfies. The third, a redhead who couldn't have been older than 25, was clinging to Robert's arm like he was her personal hero. "Welcome to my ranch, ladies," Robert announced, his voice carrying across the yard with theatrical grandeur. 800 acres of pure Montana wilderness, all mine. My ranch, all his. The lies were starting already. I stayed hidden in the barn, watching, as Robert led them toward the house. He'd clearly been here before. He knew where I kept the spare key, knew which door stuck, knew to warn them about the loose step on the porch. The realization that he'd been using my property without permission sent a cold anger through my veins. "This place is so rustic," the blonde said, though she didn't make it sound like a compliment. "Does it have Wi-Fi?" "Of course it does, Tiffany," Robert replied, fishing the key from under the flower pot where I'd hidden it. "I had it upgraded last month. Nothing but the best for my guests." Upgraded last month. I'd installed that Wi-Fi system 6 months ago, and Robert had never paid a dime toward it. But listening to him talk, you'd think he'd personally strung every cable. They disappeared into the house, and I heard their voices through the open windows. Robert was giving them a tour, describing rooms and amenities like a real estate agent, showing off $1 million property. Every few minutes, one of the women would squeal with delight or make some comment about how amazing everything was. I waited 30 minutes before making my move. The key to any successful reconnaissance mission is patience. Let the enemy get comfortable, let them think they're safe, then observe their true behavior when they believe no one is watching. I approached the house from the back, staying low and using the natural cover of the pine trees I'd planted along the property line. Years of training had taught me how to move silently, how to observe without being observed. The women had changed into swimwear and were lounging by the small pond behind the house, drinks in hand despite it being barely noon. "So, Robert," the redhead was saying, her voice carrying clearly across the water, "tell us more about this investment opportunity." Robert, now shirtless and clearly preening for his audience, took a long swig from what looked like my best whiskey before answering, "It's simple, really. I've got connections in the telecommunications industry, insider information about which companies are about to merge, which technologies are about to explode, get in early with the right amount of capital, and we're talking about returns of 300, maybe 400%. The brunette, who'd introduced herself as Monica, leaned forward with interest. "And how much capital are we talking about? For you ladies, I could probably get you in for as little as $50,000 each. Maybe 75 depending on timing. $50,000. These women were being set up for what any reasonable person would recognize as a classic investment scam. But Robert was selling it with such confidence, such apparent insider knowledge, that I could see them buying every word. "The thing is," Robert continued, settling back in one of my deck chairs like he was holding court, "this kind of opportunity doesn't come along often. My connections won't wait forever, and there are only so many spots available. Classic high-pressure sales tactics: create urgency, limit supply, make the mark feel special for being offered the opportunity. I'd seen it 100 times in different contexts, and it never failed to work on people who wanted to believe they were smarter than everyone else." Tiffany, the blonde, was practically bouncing with excitement. "This is exactly what I've been looking for. My divorce settlement is just sitting in a boring savings account, earning basically nothing." "Smart woman," Robert said, raising his glass in a toast. "Sarah could learn something from you about taking risks." Sarah. My daughter's name in his mouth while he was surrounded by other women, planning to swindle them out of their life savings, made my hands clench into fists. "Speaking of Sarah," Monica said with a sly smile, "she doesn't know about us being here, does she?" Robert's laugh was cold and calculating. "Sarah doesn't know about a lot of things. She thinks I'm at a boring conference in Billings, learning about new customer service protocols." "Poor thing," the redhead said, though she didn't sound sympathetic at all. "Married to a man with vision, and too naive to appreciate it. Sarah's problem," Robert said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "is that she's too much like her father. Rigid, old-fashioned, no imagination. She can't see past her little safe world of teaching high school English and grading papers." Teaching high school English. My daughter, who had a master's degree in literature, who stayed late every day helping struggling students, who volunteered at the literacy center on weekends, was being reduced to nothing more than a boring obstacle to Robert's grand plans. "Still," Tiffany said, "she must suspect something. Wives usually do." "Sarah doesn't suspect anything because she doesn't want to," Robert replied. "She's too invested in the fantasy of our perfect marriage to ask uncomfortable questions. And her father's too broken down and guilt-ridden to cause any trouble." Broken down and guilt-ridden. I touched the secure radio clip to my belt, a piece of military-grade equipment that could reach Sarah's phone no matter where she was in Chicago. One call, one message, and this whole charade would be over. But that would be too easy. Robert needed to show his true colors completely, needed to reveal the full extent of his character before I made my move. Sarah deserved to see exactly who she'd married, not just hear about it secondhand. As the afternoon wore on, I continued my surveillance from various positions around the property. The women grew progressively drunker and more careless with their conversation. Robert grew more boastful and more revealing about his contempt for Sarah, for me, for anyone who stood in the way of his ambitions. By evening, they'd moved the party inside, and I could hear them through the windows planning their investments and laughing about how easy it was to find women with money and no financial sense. Robert was in his element, playing the role of successful businessman with inside knowledge and exclusive opportunities. What none of them knew was that every word, every laugh, every casual betrayal was being recorded by the security system I'd installed. Every detail of their behavior was being captured in high-definition video and crystal-clear audio. As I made my way back to the small cabin I'd rented in town for the week, I found myself thinking about Sarah. She was probably in her hotel room in Chicago right now, maybe calling to check on me, maybe thinking about her loving husband back home. By tomorrow, she'd know the truth about both of us. But first, Robert and his business associates were going to discover that this old soldier had one more mission left in him. The game was just beginning. Saturday morning brought with it the kind of crystal-clear Montana sky that makes you understand why people fight wars over land. I was back at my observation post behind the pine trees by 6 in the morning, watching Robert and his guests stumble round my kitchen like they owned the place. The blonde, Tiffany, was wearing one of my old Navy t-shirts that she'd obviously taken from my bedroom dresser. The sight of it made my jaw clench. They were planning their day over coffee and what looked like the remainder of my emergency food supplies. Robert was animated, gesturing with his hands as he described some grand adventure he had planned for them. From my position, I could hear fragments of the conversation through the open window. "The old man has horses in the back pasture," Robert was saying. "Not the best quality, but good enough for a trail ride. We can pack a lunch, make a day of it." My horses. The 3/4 horses I'd rescued from a failed ranch operation last year. Animals I'd spent months rehabilitating and training. The idea of Robert using them as props for his little performance made something cold and dangerous stir in my chest. But it was what happened next that changed everything. Monica, the brunette who seemed to be the most business-minded of the three, pulled out her phone and started scrolling through what looked like financial documents. "Before we get too carried away with fun," she said, "I want to see some proof of these connections you keep talking about, Robert. $50,000 isn't pocket change, even for me." Robert's expression flickered for just a moment, a micro-expression of irritation that I recognized from interrogating hostile subjects. He recovered quickly, but not before I caught it. "Of course," he said smoothly. "I've got everything on my laptop. Financial projections, insider reports, correspondence with my contacts. I'll show you everything after breakfast." That's when Tiffany, still wearing my shirt, made a comment that stopped my blood cold. "You know, Robert, I have to say I'm impressed by how well you know this place. Most men can't even remember where they put their car keys, but you know where everything is here. The spare blankets, the good whiskey, even which drawer has the silverware." Robert laughed, but there was something forced about it. "I've been here a few times. Sarah's father likes me to check on things when he's away." A few times. The lie came so easily, so naturally, that I knew immediately it wasn't the first time he'd told it. But the redhead, who'd been mostly quiet during the conversation, asked the question that made everything click into place. "How long has he been letting you use this place? It's such a perfect setup for private meetings." Private meetings. The way she said it, with that knowing smile, made it clear this wasn't their first rodeo. These women weren't just potential victims of Robert's investment scheme, they were part of a pattern. "Let's just say Sarah's work schedule is very predictable," Robert replied. "She has training conferences 4 times a year, and each one lasts exactly 10 days. Very convenient for a man who needs space to conduct serious business. 4 times a year. 10 days each time." I grabbed my phone and started scrolling through the photos Sarah had sent me over the past 2 years. Pictures from her various training conferences, selfies from hotel rooms, group shots with colleagues. As I scrolled, a sickening pattern emerged. Every single time Sarah had been away for training, I'd noticed small changes when I visited the ranch afterward. A glass out of place here, a different brand of soap in the bathroom there. I'd attributed it to my own forgetfulness, the scattered mind of an aging man living alone. But now I realized the truth. Robert had been using my property as his personal playground for years. I made my way back to the small cabin I was renting in town, my mind racing with implications. If Robert had been bringing women to my ranch for 2 years, if this was an established pattern, then this wasn't just about cheating on Sarah. This was about something much bigger, much more calculated. I fired up my laptop and accessed the security system I'd installed. The cameras I'd placed throughout the property weren't just recording the current visit, they had motion-activated storage that went back 6 months. If Robert had been here before, there would be evidence. It took me 3 hours to go through all the footage, but what I found made my hands shake with rage. Robert hadn't just been bringing women to my ranch, He'd been running what looked like a full-scale operation, different groups of women, different weekends, all of them being fed the same lines about investment opportunities and insider knowledge. But there was more. In one video from 3 months ago, I watched Robert give a tour to a different set of women, and he was using photographs from my own house, to support his stories. Pictures of me in dress uniform, commendations I'd received, even a photo of Sarah's college graduation that he'd taken from my mantelpiece. "This is my father-in-law," I heard him saying to the women in the video. "Decorated war hero, owns thousands of acres throughout Montana. The family has serious money, serious connections. That's how I get my insider information, military contracts, government telecommunications projects, the kind of stuff that never makes it to the public markets." He was using my military service, my reputation, my relationship with Sarah as credentials for his scams. These women weren't just being sold fake investment opportunities. They were being sold a fake version of Robert's life, one where he was connected to wealth and power through marriage to a war hero's daughter. I sat back in my chair staring at the screen. This wasn't just cheating, this wasn't just lying, this was identity theft, fraud, and emotional abuse on a scale that made my military training kick into overdrive. But the worst revelation was yet to come. In the most recent footage, from just 2 days ago, I watched Robert setting up equipment in my living room. Not cameras, but audio recording devices. Professional-grade equipment that he clearly knew how to operate. I fast-forwarded through the footage and found what I was looking for. Robert, alone in my house, calling someone on his phone. "Yeah, it's me," he said to whoever was on the other end. "I'm setting up for the weekend. Listen, I need you to keep that pressure on the old man about the loan payments. Sarah's starting to ask questions about our finances, and I need her focused on her father's problems instead of mine." Loan payments? What loan payments? The voice on the other end was faint, but I caught enough to understand. Someone was calling Sarah, pretending to be from a bank, telling her that I'd defaulted on loan payments for the ranch. Payments that didn't exist for loans I'd never taken. "Perfect," Robert continued. "Keep telling her the bank is going to foreclose if he doesn't come up with $30,000 by the end of the month. She's already talked to me about maybe helping him out with our savings. Once she agrees to that, I'll have access to her account, and we can move forward with the bigger plan." The bigger plan. I rewound the footage and played it again, making sure I'd heard correctly. Robert wasn't just running investment scams with random women. He was setting up my own daughter to be his biggest mark. I reached for my secure radio, the one that could reach Sarah anywhere in the country, then stopped. I'd given Robert my word that I wouldn't tell Sarah about his visit, but I'd never promised not to show her. Standing up from my desk, I walked over to the bag of equipment I'd brought from the ranch. Along with my surveillance gear, I'd packed something else, a portable satellite uplink system that I'd acquired during my last years of active duty. Military-grade communication equipment that could broadcast high-definition video anywhere in the world. Robert wanted to play games with technology and insider information. He had no idea he was playing against someone who'd spent 40 years using equipment that made his toys look like children's walkie-talkies. I started setting up the uplink system, my hands moving with the muscle memory of thousands of similar operations. By tomorrow morning, Sarah would see everything, every lie, every betrayal, every calculated manipulation that Robert had been orchestrating. But first, I was going to give Robert and his business associates one more day to show me exactly who they really were. Because when this was over, I wanted there to be no doubt, no possibility of misunderstanding about the kind of man my daughter had married. The evidence was already overwhelming, but in my experience, when dealing with an enemy, it's always better to have too much proof than too little. Outside my cabin window, the Montana sky was turning the deep blue of evening. Tomorrow would bring the reckoning that Robert had been setting in motion for 2 years. He'd wanted to use my ranch for his schemes. Tomorrow he'd discover that this old soldier had a few schemes of his own. Sunday morning brought unexpected visitors to my ranch, and with them, the confirmation that Robert's operation was far more dangerous than I'd initially realized. I was back in position behind the pine trees, monitoring the situation through my field glasses, when a black Escalade with tinted windows pulled up next to Robert's BMW. Two men emerged from the vehicle, and immediately my military training went into high alert. These weren't more potential marks for Robert's investment scheme. These men moved with the controlled precision of professionals, scanning the area with the systematic attention of people accustomed to danger. The older man, probably in his 50s, with silver hair and an expensive suit, carried himself with the authority of someone used to being in charge. The younger one, maybe 35 and built like he spent serious time in the gym, kept his hand close to his jacket in a way that suggested he was armed. Robert came out of the house to greet them, and even from my concealed position I could see the change in his demeanor. Gone was the cocky confidence he'd displayed with the women. Now he looked nervous, almost servile, like a student called to the principal's office. "Mr. Valdez," Robert said, his voice carrying clearly across the morning air, "I wasn't expecting you until this afternoon." The older man, Valdez, looked around the property with calculating eyes. "Plans changed. I wanted to see the setup you've been bragging about, make sure it's worth the investment we've been discussing." Investment. But this wasn't about Robert's fake telecommunications deals. This was something else entirely. I adjusted my position to get a better angle and pulled out the directional microphone I'd brought from my equipment stash, military-grade surveillance gear that could pick up conversations from 200 yards away. "The location is perfect," Robert was saying, leading the two men toward the barn. 800 acres, completely isolated, no neighbors for miles. The old man who owns it is a broken-down alcoholic who barely leaves his cabin in town. We could run operations here for months without anyone noticing. Operations. My blood ran cold as the implications hit me. Robert wasn't just using my ranch for investment scams, he was planning to use it for something that required isolation and secrecy. The women from the previous days were nowhere to be seen. Either they'd left earlier, or Robert had sent them away before these new visitors arrived. Either way, their absence told me that what was about to be discussed wasn't meant for their ears. "Show me the buildings," Valdez ordered, and Robert led them toward the large storage barn I'd built for hay and equipment. I moved carefully through the trees, staying parallel to their path using natural cover to remain invisible. 40 years of reconnaissance training doesn't disappear just because you retire, and I found myself slipping back into the mindset of a soldier gathering intelligence on enemy positions. At the barn, Robert was opening doors and gesturing like a real estate agent, showing off prime property. Plenty of storage space, electrical connections throughout, and the beauty is that legitimate ranch supplies can move in and out without attracting attention. "What about the owner?" the younger man asked. His voice had the flat, emotionless tone of someone who'd asked that question before in contexts where the answer mattered for more than just business reasons. "Not a problem," Robert replied, and something in his tone made my hands clench into fists. "The old fool trusts me completely. He's guilt-ridden about his relationship with his daughter, desperate to make amends. I've got him convinced that I'm the best thing that ever happened to his family." Valdez walked around the barn, testing doors, checking sight lines, evaluating the property with the thoroughness of someone planning a long-term operation. "And if he becomes a problem?" Robert's laugh was cold and calculated. "He won't, but if he does, well, he's an old man living alone on an isolated ranch. Accidents happen." The casual way he said it, like he was discussing the weather, made something dangerous and primal wake up in my chest. This wasn't just about financial fraud anymore. These people were planning to use my property for criminal activities, and they were prepared to eliminate me if I got in their way. I activated the recording function on my surveillance equipment, making sure every word was being captured. Whatever they were planning, I needed evidence that would hold up in court. "The timeline is crucial," Valdez was saying as they moved back toward the house. "We need this location operational within 30 days. The shipments from Mexico are already in motion, and we can't afford delays." Shipments from Mexico. My stomach dropped as the pieces started falling into place. This wasn't about fake investments or relationship fraud. This was about drugs, human trafficking, or some other criminal enterprise that required isolated locations and plausible cover stories. 30 days won't be a problem, Robert assured him. The daughter will be away for training again in 3 weeks. That gives us a clear window to set up without any family complications. And the ownership paperwork? Robert's grin was visible, even from my position. Already in progress. I've had my wife convinced for months that her father is in financial trouble, defaulting on loans, facing foreclosure. She's been begging me to help him out with our savings. Once I have access to her accounts, it's just a matter of the right legal documents and the right pressure. They were planning to steal my ranch, not just use it, but take legal ownership through fraudulent means, using Sarah's love for me as the weapon to accomplish it. The younger man pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of the property, documenting everything with the systematic attention of someone creating a detailed operational plan. What about local law enforcement? County sheriff covers an area the size of Connecticut, with maybe 6 deputies, Robert replied. Response time to this location is at least 45 minutes, assuming they even get called. Most of the neighbors are ranchers who mind their own business and assume everyone else does the same. As they continued their inspection, I realized I was witnessing the planning stages of a major criminal operation. Whatever Valdez and his organization were involved in, they saw my ranch as the perfect base of operations, isolated, privately owned, with legitimate reasons for vehicles and supplies to come and go. But they'd made one crucial miscalculation. They assumed they were dealing with a broken-down old man who could be easily manipulated or eliminated. They had no idea they were planning to take over property owned by someone who'd spent 4 decades fighting people, exactly like them. I carefully retreated from my observation position and made my way back to the tree line where I'd hidden my motorcycle. I had enough evidence now to destroy Robert's life 10 times over, but this situation had escalated beyond simple family drama. This was a matter of national security. Back at my cabin, I fired up the secure communication system I'd brought from my military days and started making calls. Some of my old contacts were still active in various federal agencies, and what I'd just witnessed fell squarely into their jurisdiction. The first call went to Sarah, not to tell her about Robert's visit, I'd keep that promise, but to tell her something that would bring her home immediately. "Dad?" Her voice came through crystal clear on the secure line. "Is everything okay? You sound different." "Sarah, I need you to cut your training short and come home. There is something urgent we need to discuss about the ranch." "What kind of urgent? Are you okay?" I looked at the stack of evidence I'd compiled, the recordings, the photographs, the documented proof of Robert's criminal conspiracy. "I'm fine, sweetheart, but we have a serious problem that can't wait. Can you catch a flight tonight?" There was a pause, then Sarah's voice came back with the firm determination that reminded me why I was so proud of her. "I'll be on the first flight out of Chicago. Dad, whatever's happening, we'll handle it together. Together." After years of distance, years of guilt, years of feeling like I'd failed as a father, my daughter was ready to stand with me against whatever threat we were facing. Robert thought he'd been playing a game with a lonely old man and his naive daughter. Tomorrow, he'd discover that he'd declared war on a family that knew how to fight back. But first, I had one more call to make. My contact at the DEA would be very interested to hear about shipments from Mexico and the isolated ranch location that was being prepared to receive them. By tomorrow evening, Robert's criminal enterprise would be over. But tonight, I had a daughter to protect and a legacy to defend. The old soldier wasn't just back in the fight, he was ready to win it. Monday morning arrived with the kind of cold, crisp air that makes every sound carry for miles across the Montana landscape. I was positioned in my observation post by 5 in the morning, watching my ranch through field glasses as federal agents took their positions around the property. My contact at the DEA had moved faster than I'd expected. By midnight Sunday, they'd assembled a joint task force with the FBI and local law enforcement. Robert had no idea he was about to walk into the most sophisticated trap of his criminal career. Sarah's flight had landed in Billings at 11 the night before, and she was waiting at my cabin, armed with questions I wasn't quite ready to answer. I'd told her about Robert's criminal associations, about the planned takeover of the ranch, but I'd kept my promise about not mentioning his personal betrayals. That revelation would come from the evidence itself. "Dad, I still don't understand how you discovered all this," Sarah had said the night before, pacing around my small cabin like a caged animal. "You've been living quietly out here for 2 years. How did you suddenly become aware of Robert's criminal activities?" I'd given her a carefully edited version of the truth, that I'd installed security cameras after some break-ins in the area, that I'd noticed unusual activity at the ranch during her training conferences, that my military instincts had kicked in when something felt wrong. What I hadn't told her was that her husband had been using our property to cheat on her for 2 years, or that he'd been using my military service and her love for me as weapons in his schemes. Some truths needed to come from the evidence itself, not from an old man's accusations. Now, watching through my field glasses as Robert's BMW pulled into the ranch driveway, right on schedule, I felt the familiar calm that came before a mission reached its critical phase. Sarah was beside me, her own pair of binoculars focused on the house where she'd visited countless times, never knowing it was being used as a staging ground for criminal operations. "There he is," she whispered, her voice tight with tension. "God, Dad, I can't believe this is really happening." Robert emerged from his car alone. Apparently he'd sent his weekend guests away before the week began, just as I'd predicted. He was carrying what looked like surveying equipment and a laptop case, probably planning to finalize the operational details that Valdez had requested. What he found instead was Agent Martinez of the DEA, along with 6 other federal agents waiting for him on my front porch. Even from our position half a mile away, I could see Robert's reaction. He stopped dead in his tracks, the laptop case slipping from his fingers and hitting the gravel driveway. For a moment he stood frozen. Then he started backing toward his car. "Federal agents," Martinez's voice carried clearly across the morning air, amplified by the loudspeaker system they'd set up. "Robert Harrison, you're under arrest. Keep your hands visible and move slowly toward the house." Robert made a run for it. I'd anticipated this possibility, which is why I'd suggested the agents position vehicles at both ends of my driveway. Robert made it maybe 50 yards before finding his escape route blocked by 2 black SUVs and 4 more federal agents with weapons drawn. "That's my husband," Sarah said beside me, her voice hollow with disbelief. "That's the man I've been married to for 5 years, and he's running from federal agents on your property." I reached over and squeezed her shoulder, feeling the tremor of shock and betrayal running through her. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I know this isn't how you wanted to learn the truth." The arrest itself was anticlimactic. Robert, faced with overwhelming odds and no escape route, surrendered without further resistance. I watched through my field glasses as they put him in handcuffs, read him his rights, and loaded him into one of the SUVs. But the real revelation came when Agent Martinez activated the portable screen they'd brought to display evidence from my surveillance system. "Sarah," I said gently, "there's more you need to see, and I want you to know that everything you're about to learn, I discovered the same way you're discovering it now, through evidence, not through accusations." She turned to look at me, her face pale but determined. "Show me." I activated my own laptop and pulled up the surveillance footage from the weekend. Sarah watched in silence as the recordings played, showing Robert giving tours of my property to multiple women, bragging about his wealth and connections, using photographs from my house to support his lies. When the audio began playing, Robert's casual dismissal of her as too much like her father, his descriptions of her as naive and rigid, his laughter about her inability to see past the fantasy of their perfect marriage, Sarah's face went through a transformation I'd seen before. In combat situations when soldiers realized they'd been betrayed by someone they trusted. "He's been doing this for 2 years, she said, her voice steady but deadly quiet. "Every time I went to training, every time I told him I'd miss him, every time I called to check in because I was worried about him being lonely." "There's more," I said, pulling up the recordings from the fake loan harassment. "He's been having someone call you about non-existent loans, trying to convince you that I'm in financial trouble." As Sarah listened to Robert's voice discussing his plans to access her savings accounts, to use her love for me as a weapon to steal our property, something hardened in her expression that reminded me of her mother during the worst moments of our marriage. He was going to steal the ranch, she said, not a question but a statement of fact, and turn it into a base of operations for drug trafficking, I confirmed. The federal agents have recordings of him discussing shipments from Mexico, storage facilities, the whole operation. Sarah stood up from her chair, walked to the window, and stared out at the mountains for a long time. When she turned back to me, her expression was something I'd never seen before. Not angry, not hurt, but utterly resolved. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." I nodded. "When Robert called you last week to demand use of the ranch, when he threatened you and tried to blackmail you into silence, you could have told me immediately. You could have exposed everything right then. Why didn't you?" I took a deep breath, considering my answer carefully. "Because I gave him my word that I wouldn't tell you about his visit, and because you needed to see who he really was, not just hear about it from your father. You kept your promise to a man who was planning to destroy our family. I kept my word because that's who I am. But I never promised not to show you the truth." Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing everything she'd learned. Finally, she spoke again, her voice carrying a strength I hadn't heard since she was a child. "I want to be there when they interrogate him. I want him to know that I know everything." Sarah, that's not—" "Dad," she interrupted, "for 5 years I've been married to a man who saw me as nothing more than a tool to access your property and my savings account. For 2 years, he's been bringing other women to the place where I thought we were building our future together. He's been planning to steal the ranch that represents everything you've worked for." She paused, looking directly into my eyes with an intensity that reminded me exactly whose daughter she was. "I'm not asking for revenge. I'm asking for the chance to look him in the eye when he realizes that his perfect victims turned out to be smarter and stronger than he ever imagined." Agent Martinez appeared at the cabin door, interrupting our conversation. "Mr. Patterson, Ms. Harrison, we're ready for you at the station. Your husband is asking to speak with you, ma'am. Says he can explain everything." Sarah looked at me, then back at Martinez. "Oh, I'm sure he can. Tell him I'll be right there." As we drove toward town, following the convoy of federal vehicles, I found myself thinking about the call Robert had made just 1 week ago. He'd tried to threaten and intimidate an old man, never realizing that he'd just declared war on someone who'd spent 40 years learning how to win battles against people exactly like him. But more than that, he'd underestimated the woman he'd married. Sarah wasn't the naive, rigid teacher he'd described to his criminal associates. She was the daughter of a Navy SEAL, and she'd inherited more than just my stubbornness. Robert was about to discover that some families don't break when you attack them. They fight back. The federal building in Billings felt like familiar territory. I'd been in similar rooms countless times during my military career, though usually on the other side of the interrogation table. Agent Martinez led Sarah and me through a maze of corridors to an observation room where we could watch Robert's interview through one-way glass. Robert sat at a metal table in the adjacent room, still in handcuffs, his expensive clothes wrinkled from a night in custody. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without his audience of impressed women and criminal associates. When Agent Rodriguez entered the room with a thick file of evidence, Robert's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, denial, and finally, a desperate kind of calculation. "Mr. Harrison," Rodriguez began, settling into the chair across from Robert, "let's start with what we found at the ranch. Care to explain why you were planning to use someone else's property as a distribution center for narcotics trafficking?" Robert's first instinct was to lie, of course. "I don't know what you're talking about. I was just visiting my father-in-law's ranch for the weekend. If someone told you I was involved in drug trafficking, they're lying." Rodriguez opened the file and spread out photographs from the surveillance footage. "These pictures show you giving detailed tours of the property to known associates of the Valdez cartel. You discussed storage facilities, isolation factors, and response times for local law enforcement. In your own words, you called it the perfect location for operations." I watched Robert's face as the evidence mounted against him. He went through the classic stages of a cornered criminal: denial, anger, bargaining, and finally a desperate attempt to shift blame. "Look, I was being coerced," Robert said, his voice taking on a pleading tone. "These people threatened me, threatened my wife. I had to cooperate with them, or they would have hurt Sarah." Sarah, standing beside me in the observation room, let out a sound that was part laugh and part disgust. "Listen to him. Even now, even caught red-handed, he's trying to make himself the victim." Rodriguez wasn't buying it either. "The recordings tell a different story, Mr. Harrison. You approached Valdez's organization, not the other way around. You offered the ranch location in exchange for a percentage of their operations profits. And you did it all while planning to steal the property through fraudulent financial manipulation. That's when Rodriguez played the audio recording of Robert discussing his plans to access Sarah's savings accounts, to convince her that I was in financial trouble, to use her love for me as a weapon to gain control of the ranch. Through the one-way glass, I watched my son-in-law's face as his own voice filled the interrogation room, casually discussing how easy it would be to manipulate his wife, how naive she was, how little respect he had for either of us. "He thought he was so clever," Sarah said quietly beside me. "All those nights he came home late from work meetings. All those times he encouraged me to visit you more often, said he thought I should help you with ranch maintenance. He was mapping out the property for his criminal friends." The interrogation continued for another hour, with Rodriguez methodically destroying every lie and excuse Robert attempted. The evidence was overwhelming: surveillance footage, audio recordings, financial records, testimony from arrested associates. Robert's criminal enterprise was finished, and he knew it. But it was what happened next that gave me the closure I didn't know I needed. "Mr. Harrison," Rodriguez said, "your wife is here. She's seen all the evidence, heard all the recordings. She'd like to speak with you." Robert's face went white. "Sarah's here? You told her about the ranch?" "She told herself, Mr. Harrison. She watched the surveillance footage of your weekend activities, listened to the recordings of your conversations, learned about your plans to steal her father's property and use her savings to fund criminal operations." Rodriguez stood up and moved toward the door. "She's asked for 5 minutes alone with you, no recording, no observation. Just a wife talking to her husband one last time." Sarah squeezed my hand before leaving the observation room. "I need to do this, Dad. I need him to know that his perfect victim was never as helpless as he thought." I watched through the one-way glass as Sarah entered the interrogation room. Robert immediately began talking, his words spilling out in a desperate rush of explanations and excuses. "Sarah, thank God you're here. This is all a misunderstanding. I was trying to protect you, protect us. These federal agents, they're twisting everything I said, making it sound like—" "Stop!" Sarah's voice cut through his rambling like a blade. She sat down across from him, her posture straight and controlled. "Just stop talking, Robert." For the first time since I'd known him, Robert obeyed an order from my daughter. "I've seen the surveillance footage," Sarah continued, her voice steady and calm. "I've watched you bring other women to the ranch where we talked about building our future. I've heard you laugh about how naive I am, how easy I am to manipulate, how little you think of me and my father." Robert's mouth opened, but no words came out. "I've heard you planning to steal my father's ranch, to access my savings accounts, to turn the property where my mother's ashes are scattered into a base for drug trafficking." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "I know exactly who you are now, Robert. And you're nothing like the man I thought I married." "Sarah, please let me explain." "No," she said firmly. "I'm going to explain something to you. You thought you were playing a game with a broken-down old man and his naive daughter. You thought we were easy targets, people you could manipulate and control and ultimately destroy." Sarah stood up, her voice taking on a strength that reminded me powerfully of her mother during her most determined moments. "But here's what you didn't understand about my family, Robert. My father didn't survive 40 years as a Navy SEAL by being weak or gullible, and I didn't grow up as his daughter without learning something about recognizing threats and protecting what matters." She moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at him one last time. "You failed your character test, Robert, and now you get to live with the consequences." Sarah left the interrogation room and rejoined me in the observation area. Through the glass, we watched Robert put his head in his hands as the full weight of his situation finally hit him. "How do you feel?" I asked her. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then smiled for the first time since this whole ordeal began. "Free," she said simply. "For the first time in years, I feel completely free." Agent Martinez appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Patterson, Ms. Harrison, we've got everything we need. Mr. Harrison will be transferred to federal custody pending trial. Given the evidence, he'll likely be looking at 10 to 15 years for conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering charges." As we left the federal building, Sarah linked her arm through mine, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. "Dad, I owe you an apology." I frowned. "For what?" "For not seeing what was right in front of me, for letting him isolate me from you, convince me that you were struggling, that you needed my help, but were too proud to ask for it. I should have trusted my instincts." I stopped walking and turned to face her. "Sarah, you trusted the man you loved. That's not a character flaw. That's what good people do. The flaw was in him, not in you." We drove back to the ranch together as the sun set over the Montana mountains. The federal agents had finished processing the crime scene, and the property was ours again. As we pulled into the driveway, I realized this was the first time in 2 years that Sarah had visited the ranch without Robert's presence overshadowing everything. "What happens now?" she asked, as we sat on the porch watching the stars appear in the clear mountain sky. "Now we rebuild," I said. "The ranch, our relationship, your life, all of it." Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that surprised me. "Dad, would it be okay if I stayed here for a while? I need some time to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be the perfect wife to a man who saw me as nothing more than a useful tool." I felt something tight in my chest loosen for the first time in years. "This is your home, Sarah. It always has been." 3 months later, Sarah had moved back to Montana permanently. She got a job teaching at the local high school, and in the evenings, she helped me repair and improve the ranch. We didn't talk much about Robert. He'd been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, and frankly, neither of us felt he deserved any more of our mental energy. Instead, we talked about the future, about turning part of the ranch into a therapeutic writing program for veterans, about the grandchildren I hope to have someday, about the second chances that life sometimes offers to families smart enough and strong enough to take them. Robert had tested our character, thinking he could break us apart and use the pieces for his own criminal purposes. Instead, he'd reminded us who we really were, a family that knew how to fight for what mattered, how to protect each other, and how to recognize our real enemies. The old soldier had completed his final mission, and this time, everyone he cared about came home safe.